Hi, I'm Sean. I'm going to give you a tour of ArcGIS Enterprise. And in this case, what I'm going to do is go through the user interface, and I'll show you what's happening in the back end a little bit. This differs from my other videos, which go through the components of ArcGIS Enterprise. I highly recommend you watch that first before this one. Let's get started. Now, likely you're familiar with ArcGIS Online a little bit. This is pretty much the same thing, but it's an on-premise installation. So you have to install all the components onto your own computer, usually a server. In this case, it's actually Windows Pro, and it's just meant as a demo environment. This isn't one that's normally available. So just like ArcGIS Online, there's a sign-in up here. And your installation of ArcGIS Enterprise has to have a certain number of user access licenses. So you need to license it to be able to get in. So I've created a couple of different users in here. I'm going to log in as myself here, and this is the master user or administrator. So this user has the ability of changing and managing the entire site. So let's jump into that. So the top bar here, if you're not familiar with ArcGIS Online, looks pretty similar to it. Home is this main window. Gallery is a gallery of items. The map is literally a map that you can customize and configure. And you'll notice that the interface changes when you're on the map. You can almost think of it as a little bit of an application. Scene is pretty much the same concept, but it's a 3D model. Groups are for setting up groups to manage items. Content is the main content display. And in this case, you can think of it as your file manager. And literally, these are items. These are items that are stored on the local computer. And I'll show you that in a minute. Organization allows you to basically organize the entire site and set it up the way you'd like it. So you can see here 3 of 5 members. That means I have 5 access licenses, 2 are creators, and then 3 are viewers only. So both 2 creator accounts have been assigned. That's why there's 0 available. One of those users, the creator users, has to be the administrator. So let's go and take a look at what the settings look like inside of this. So with the organization selected, you get this bar here, and you can go to the overview, members, licenses, status, and settings for the organization. Again, this is the administrative user. So members will show me the users that have been added. And you can see, as I said, there are 3 users for this account. There's 2 creators and a viewer. And you can see the current account I'm logged into is an administrator. There's also a publisher and a viewer. And we'll go into those accounts in a few minutes. Licenses allows you to control the licenses as well as the different user types that are associated with it and what applications are available for each. I'm not going to go through all the different applications. Esri's website does that pretty well. The status takes a look at the overall status of the solution to make sure everything's running. And you can see here it gets some information about the content, the members, and the groups that are inside of it. So it's kind of like an overview. But settings, this is the main area for you to control the entire solution. So this is where you would go to configure and do things as that administrator. This is where a normal user definitely wouldn't have access to a lot of this information. So let's just go through each one of these really quickly just so you can see it. So there is a homepage editor, and I already showed the homepage. It looks like this by default. So you can change the background and make it a different icon and like put your logo and stuff in there. The gallery allows you to control what is happening in the gallery. So again, you saw that up here. This allows you to control what's happening with the map, and you can see Map Viewer, Map Viewer Classic. And if you're not aware, Map Viewer Classic is actually based on the old JavaScript API, which is going away. So definitely stick with the new one from this point forward. Items are the actual files, we'll call them, inside of the content. So this list are items effectively. So that's items, so you can control how those are set up. Groups are for managing the items and to be able to share them amongst the members of the actual organization. There's some utility services here, and this is an important distinction between ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise, because this is all self-contained and managed on your system, your environment. So you need to control everything associated with it. For example, printing, geometry, geoenrichment, hydrology, and other services that are effectively part of the ArcGIS server component in ArcGIS Enterprise. So this is actually the portal component. You can connect it with ArcGIS Online and be able to configure it to be able to grab and do things on ArcGIS Online. You have the server component, and you can see here, this is actually a federated server to it. And again, if you go back to the video on how ArcGIS Enterprise is set up, this is the link to the ArcGIS server, which does all of the heavy lifting for geographic work, creating maps and other data to be able to stream to clients. Member roles allows you to configure the roles. These are the default roles that are here. I just want to take a second to go through these. The administrator, which I am right now, has access to everything. The data editor, publisher have different rights associated with what they're doing. The data editor typically just edits data, and the publisher can do a lot more, including edit data. Users can only do specific things, and then the lowest is a viewer. Now the user, publisher, and data editor, as well as an administrator, needs a creator license. So if you weren't aware, there's creator license and viewer licenses. The roles you define have to link to those. So a viewer is a viewer, but everything else needs to be a creator. So it's a good idea to try to maximize those creator roles because they're quite expensive. And you can actually create a role and go through all of the different permissions associated with everything. I'm not going to do that, but all the permission settings are in here. You can enable or disable based on what you'd like for each to be able to really fine-grain the control for individual users. The new member defaults, so you can set the user type and the role that you want when you're creating users, add on licenses and groups that you want to define to them. And then collaborations allows you to have your organization sync and share with other organizations and set them up in a particular way so that items created in your environment can be shared with others. Esri doesn't really like you to be able to share your username and password. It's supposed to be one person per username and password. So when you want to edit items in other organizations, you already have your own organization with a creator license. This allows you to be able to kind of share that creator into another organization by sharing the items that that creator has created. So it's kind of like creating the items locally, and then you get to share them with another org, and then they can use them the way they'd like. So it's a little bit of a complex method of being able to do it. But in this general overview, it's beyond scope to go too much detail. Security is really IT-related security items. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory. You can make ArcGIS Enterprise do single sign-on with an LDAP or other environments using the logins here. You can even do multi-factor authentication, and there's a lot of other configurations related to security. And then there's organizational extensions, which I don't have them on. So that's the main settings that are in there. Now, if you wanted to add new users, you would go under members. And this is where you can control the users, add passwords, remove them. This current implementation of ArcGIS Enterprise is standalone. It's not using an LDAP, it's not using an Active Directory, it's just all in one. So it authenticates itself. And the users here, you can see I've created them within the environment. I've already done that. But if you wanted to create new users, you can do that very easily using the interface. But in here, you can actually go and change the users themselves if you wanted to. For example, you can change the type of user or change other settings associated with them. So you can change it to one of those roles that were set before. So add members right here. When you're going to go add the user, you can add pre-built users. If you have different environments, you can use those to be able to add the users. You can do a new member or new member from file and be able to set them up. I'm not going to go through that. You understand where it is. So that allows you to set up, manage the environment. And this is what ArcGIS Enterprise really is. There's the multiple components. And the two big ones, well, three big ones really, are the portal, server, and data store. And all of those are configured and managed through this. Now, this interface is only the portal interface. The data store does have its own kind of hidden interface, and ArcGIS Server also has its own interface to do some specific things. So let's go and jump over to ArcGIS Server's environment, and we'll take a look at it for a second. Now, ArcGIS Server itself, by default, is set up with the URL /server. And you can see here the portal, it's set up /portal. So /portal home, whatever your domain is. And let's go to server, the server manager. Now this is just the traditional ArcGIS server environment, but it does use the single sign-on that you used inside of the ArcGIS portal. The two are actually linked. So logging in, if you're confused as to what username and password, it's actually the same user. This did an automatic login for me though. I didn't have to enter anything because I'm already logged into the portal. It was able to authenticate me. So inside of here, this looks like a normal ArcGIS server. There are managed services. You can see the hosted services. These are hosted feature layers, and you'll see them in the items. I'll show them to you in a moment. There's also system services and some utilities. So these are actually reflected when you log in as an administrator as items. So let's go to the content in here. And this is the first opportunity to kind of see what's going on. So you can see you're seeing these items in here. That's what they're called here. And they relate to services that are in here. So for example, the sample world cities is a default that's installed with ArcGIS Server. And you can see it listed right here. There's a map image layer, a WMS, and OGC layer. And if we go over to here, and we go back to the root, you can actually see that right here. And if we go take a look at this service, the capabilities on it, you can see OGC features, KML, WMS, and mapping is always available. So that service was set up, and because it has these enabled, it created items inside of my content to be able to reflect those. So that's the translation between those. That's how they're actually getting put into there. So map image layer. Let's just take a look at this for a second. You notice this is shared owner. This user, again, is the administrator, and the administrator owns all the items associated with the default in ArcGIS server. So if I go to view item details, this will bring up details about it. It's a map image layer, and you can see I own it. And if we scroll down here, there's a URL associated with this, which if I go view on that, it actually opens up that server itself. So you can see that's part of the URL here. So the local domain /server. But in this case, it's using REST services, whereas the manager uses server manager as the URL. So it's a little bit of a different URL between those two. Nonetheless, this service itself is running in here, and this service actually has this service item ID listed right here. So this ID is important. This is actually the link back to portal, because remember, ArcGIS portal and ArcGIS server are two separate pieces of software. So now I'm looking at the server side of things, but if I want to go back to the portal, that's this reference. So let's go take a look at that. So I look at the whole big random numbers and letters, just look at the last few characters. Typically, that's how you can see if they're unique. So 4 delta 29. So if we go back to here, if you look at the ID as part of this, up here at the top, 4 delta 29. So the URL actually contains that item ID. Pretty cool. So this item is pointing at that, and then you can see the URL from here. So the portal knows how to get to the REST endpoint, and the REST endpoint knows how to get to the portal. So the two know how to communicate with each other. Now this item ID is absolutely critical important for how to deal with this system. So this item ID itself, so 4 delta 29, if we actually go to the file system of where ArcGIS portal is installed, we can find that. So let's just take a look at that quickly. I have this remote desktop into the server already, and I'm on the local disk. ArcGIS Enterprise is installed in this folder, ArcGIS portal content items. And I can actually find that item ID as a folder. And if I go into that folder, you can actually start seeing some of the item information. Now this isn't the only place this information is actually stored. Some of it is actually stored in a database on the local computer as well. But let's just poke our head into this item, and so you can see here, this basically is an XML duplication of what's inside of the database that's also stored with this. So if you didn't know, there's actually a Postgres database storing this information. So that's the item database. The item database itself stores everything about items, which this page that you're looking at right here is basically that item page. So in particular, the information you're seeing about it, who created, the date that it was created, the view count, the description, all of that metadata is stored inside of that individual file. The actual data related to this is stored on the REST endpoint, and that's in ArcGIS server. So we can actually bridge over and go take a look at the ArcGIS server side of that as well. Now our first stop in ArcGIS server, it's installed with this folder structure. So I've installed it into the ArcGIS Enterprise folder, and its data are getting stored in ArcGIS server right here. There's config store services, and inside of that you can actually see all the services that are hosted inside of this. And in particular, you can see that demo sample world cities. That's part of it right here, which contains the information about it. And if we go edit this with Notepad, you can actually start seeing some of the metadata here. This, for the most part, is the exact same information that we're looking at when we're looking at the REST endpoint for this. So this information is what was being displayed in that last file. Now the manager itself can also change some things. We can actually start editing some of the things inside of here. There's some changes you can make like this, but the ArcGIS Server Manager can't do a lot. You would have to actually publish your data from something like ArcGIS Pro to get new data or change things dramatically. But you can still see some of that information in here, so technically you could edit this file directly. That's the advantage of having a Pro environment with ArcGIS Enterprise. You can publish it the normal way, or you can edit the files directly if you're savvy. Again, not a recommended way of doing it. This is really just to explain how things work, so I wouldn't recommend to do that. But these are, for the most part, the actual settings. So that gives you an idea of some of the major things inside of ArcGIS Server and ArcGIS Portal and how the two link. So to summarize, ArcGIS Enterprise itself, items, so let's go back to the items. In this case, the sample world cities. You can see it has multiple items associated with this, but the image layer is the one that actually has image capabilities. If I go to the view item details, you get information about the item. And this item is coming from this item folder. So ArcGIS Enterprise, the portal directory, content items, the item ID and you can see some of the information. And again, this is not the only place this is stored. It is stored in a Postgres database. You can get access to that Postgres database to take a look at the items. I'm not going to go through that in this video. The next part is the server side of things. So you have Server Manager, which can take a look at all of the different services that are in it, and you can see this sample world cities, again a default that's in there, and you can go edit the service and make some very basic changes about it, but again it's really just a metadata. And on the server itself, inside of the sample world cities folder here, which is under services, config store, ArcGIS server, and I put it on ArcGIS Enterprise itself as the folder, so that folder structure remained consistent. But this can change. This first part definitely could be in different places. Okay, turning back to ArcGIS portal, let's just rearrange this a little bit. We'll leave the manager up. We'll put the My Content folder first. This is the item page for that sample world cities, and then we have the map server itself. So we can test the ArcGIS server natively without portal using the REST services directory. You can see this ArcGIS JavaScript link. That'll open up the link, and it will actually do a request of the services and see if it gets returned. And there you go. So this got returned in the REST endpoint for ArcGIS server. Therefore, I know that map service is working and it's published and it's okay. That's what the demo really is for. It's just to make sure things work. And in this, you can pan around and you can zoom in on the data, but there's not much else you can do with it. There is a little layer control up here to be able to change what it is that you want to see, which layer. But it's a pretty simple interface. It's just to check stuff. So if you do need to check stuff, this is one way to do it. So that's off the REST endpoint for ArcGIS server itself. The next is under the item, you actually have this ability to open it up in a map viewer. So now this is portal, and this map viewer will open up this and bring it into a map and take a look at that same data. This, if you've used ArcGIS Online, should look more familiar. But what you're doing right now is effectively configuring a new item for this. So let's actually just start doing that, and we can take a look at it really quickly. So you can set the extent of where you'd like it. You can change the base map that is associated with this. So you can change which base map you want to use. Let's just make it the dark gray canvas. And the layers. So if we turn that off, you can see the other one. So you're starting to see some flow-throughs with the labeling, but you get the idea. And then here's the different layers in that single map service. That is right here. And you can see there's 3 layers in that map service against the REST endpoint. So effectively, the map viewer is just calling the REST endpoint to be able to grab it. Now you could add more layers and do a whole bunch of configurations, but for simplicity, let's just run with this. So there's the save button, allows me to save this map. And what that's going to do is actually save the map into ArcGIS portal. So saving the map allows me to just enter a name. So let's just call this World Cities Demo. And you can put tags in, which just allows you to search on it and find it later, and save in folder. I can save it in a folder inside of the environment. So we'll just save that. And now this has been saved. We can go back to the content, and you'll see a new item that's a web map. So that literally is referencing this. So let's just take a look at this item's details. And now we're going to get a new ID number. And this ID is using this. So let's go find this in ArcGIS Online. So on the computer, let's go to, sorry, not ArcGIS Online, ArcGIS Portal. So if I go back to the items, and I need this item number, so let's just copy this. We'll go back to the remote desktop. We'll just search on this item. And there it is. So we'll just right click, and we'll go open folder location, and there we go. So this item is what I just created. This is the web map. And if I go inside of this, you can see there's some information right here. And if I right-click and edit this with a notepad, this is literally my map configuration that I just generated. So this contains all of the information on how I configured that map, including the link to, in this case, the base map, as well as my local world cities map server. And this URL, age, GeoCommunityNet, server, REST services, if we go back to my folders here, that's where this is. So, and if we go back to the URLs on the web browser, the ArcGIS Server Manager, this sample world cities is this REST endpoint. This is the URL we're actually seeing on that computer. So take a look at that URL and then look on here, and you can actually see that same URL. So that's how it's actually creating that map. It's actually a text file, and it's just storing the information on the local computer where ArcGIS Portal is running. So Portal itself doesn't really do anything geographic. ArcGIS Server does the heavy lifting of the map through the REST endpoint. Portal just manages the configurations of various things that you're putting into it. So that's where that came through. So now if I just go back to all my content, you can see that web map is there. The World Cities demo that I just created is available right there. So this item is linked to that folder and anything that's inside of it. So now you've seen how all the parts work. Now, the next question you might have is, okay, there's things like dashboards and story maps and other solutions. Typically, they reference either layers directly, so they can either hosted feature layers, or in the case of that World Cities, it's a web map, and each one of them are slightly different. So where is that sample world cities? It's an image map layer, and that just means it's the type of service it is. You can see that right here at the end. So if it's a map server, it has access to be able to deal with some things. And the reason this is a map server, because this sample world cities is not stored in the ArcGIS data store. It's actually a separate file inside of it. I digress. I don't want to go down that road though. But nonetheless, it's a different type of service. Something like let's go to my Canada one. My Canada example, you can see feature layer hosted. We go to its view items details, and we go down to its REST endpoint. You can see this one's a feature server, which has different capabilities. A feature server allows editing. And in this case, because this feature server is actually hosted inside of ArcGIS Online, it's a hosted feature layer. That means it's actually uploaded and placed into the data store. So the data store, ArcGIS data store, that is also part of the federated ArcGIS Enterprise solution. Again, remember there's the three main things: portal, server, the data store. So this is actually stored inside of that data store. And believe it or not, that data store is a Postgres database. So there's a second Postgres database running on this computer. There's one for the items, which you're looking at here, and the second one is for the data. And if you view the data, if you're going to World Cities, let's just clean this up. Here it is. So this feature server, the REST endpoint, which ArcGIS Server is deploying, is reading the data from the data store directly. So that's how those pieces are actually communicating together. There is no interface for the data store. You can get access to that Postgres database directly. It's not meant to be managed by users. It's meant to be managed by ArcGIS Enterprise itself. It's supposed to be a black box where you just use it and don't worry about it. However, there are ways to get access to it. Again, beyond scope of this video. So inside of ArcGIS Enterprise, the whole solution, the users work through the portal interface to create items, which can be services or configurations of things like maps. And there's even more you can do with it related to all of these types of applications. But technically speaking, these applications are bolt-on or separate solutions. They're separate websites. Those websites have their own configuration and can use items that are web maps, which also contain layers of information, or it can directly potentially access layers of information, depending on the application and how it's used. So Portal's job is to just manage the overall environment and manage those items. So effectively, ArcGIS Portal is just a big file manager. That's all it is. The ArcGIS server environment, it's actually doing the heavy lifting for creating maps. It reads the data and then shows the map. And then finally, the data store part of ArcGIS Enterprise is a black box storage environment that allows users to upload data through the portal so it has somewhere to store, because Portal doesn't store the data itself. It actually throws it off to ArcGIS server, which it in turn puts it into the actual data store. And the reason it can do all that is because they're federated together. They all work as a team. Now, the next thing that's really kind of cool, let's log out as this administrator and go take a look at a different user. Let's just go look at a normal creator user. So we'll log in as demo creator. And this user, I don't have anything in it. You can see if I go to all my content, it's not looking at everything. And if I go to my organization's content, it will show things that are shared from the public or shared on the organizational level. So those are kind of the three ways you can actually take a look at data. It also can see a lot of the utility services that were published through ArcGIS server, but they're owned by that administrative user, and those are related to services that publish and things. You don't see them in ArcGIS Online, but they're there as well. They're in the background. And it also shows some other information like base maps and other things that are potentially as part of ArcGIS Enterprise. That's why there's 297 items, even though there really aren't. There's only a few items inside of this that I've created anyway. So my content, there's one item here, and I put a PDF in here. All I did was drag and drop the PDF by going new item, drag and drop in here, and it goes and actually uploads a PDF. And there's certain file types you can put on here, but where does it go? What do you mean by a file type? So let's actually open this item information page, and you can see that here, and you get the item information associated with it. There's a creation date and other metadata that you can go fill in. This is the item information. That's all Portal does. So we know if we go find the directory associated with this, we can go take a look at some other things. So let's just close that. Let's go to our items folder. We're going to do a quick search for this item. And there it is. And if I go right click and in folder location, here it is. So this is the actual folder. And if I go in it, aha, there's our PDF. So the item managing part of ArcGIS Enterprise, one of the capabilities is actually to distribute files. And if you're familiar with SharePoint or other solutions, that's all this is really doing. And the Esri info, if I go and take a look at the information inside of here, you can see this is just basic information about it. Now, again, there is a Postgres database that has this information as well. Again, it is just item information. It's just metadata. And the way I like to show this is it's really no different than just going right-click and properties on top of a file. You get a whole bunch of metadata about that file in Windows. That's what ArcGIS Enterprise and ArcGIS Online are doing with this item information page. It's just looking at the properties for a file. In this case, it's a little bit more complicated. Now, this is a file that's behind it. It's a PDF. And you can see there's open, update, and share as options in here now. So open literally opens it, and it'll open it in the file. And so you can see the URL that gets thrown to it is basically the item with data thrown on the end. And there's a token because it needs security. So ArcGIS Enterprise is effectively a fancy file sharer over the web in this context. So the item information is there. And if I update this, what it's going to do is it's going to prompt me to choose a new file, which will overwrite that file on the hard drive of where Portal is installed. So that's what the item management side of things are. Now there's a lot of other type of data you can create inside of here. So you can create feature layers, which feature layers can be editable data. That's going to get submitted into and installed into the data store, and an associated feature server in ArcGIS Enterprise will also be created. You can also link URLs. When I say link, it's not going to deal with the data. All it's going to do is create an item inside of ArcGIS Online's portal to point to the URL you give it. So this bypasses the ArcGIS server. It's not local. There's applications, tile layers, scene layers, and other data stores that you can actually create into these. I'm not going to go into detail about those. The most common one are feature layer and URLs. So you can actually link to those. So let's just do a really quick feature layer. We'll see what happens as we upload the data. Now on my local PC here, I have this zip file, and inside of it contains a shapefile. So inside of it is all of the components of what a normal shapefile would be. And so that's what you have to do with ArcGIS Enterprise when you want to upload data. Same with ArcGIS Online. For example, if you have multiple files associated that with a single component, like a shapefile is, or a file geodatabase, you have to zip it. And then when you drag and drop, it'll actually determine what it is. So you can pick shapefile or file geodatabase, and there's lots of other options that are here, but we're just going to pick shapefile. And you have two options here. One is add it as a zip file only. And you saw what happened with the PDF. It's just going to get uploaded in an item created to it. It's not going to actually deploy it. But in this case, what we're going to do is add the canada.zip and get ArcGIS Enterprise to publish it as a hosted feature layer. So let's do that. You can name it Canada Video Demo, and we can put it into a folder. We only have one folder. We can create a new folder if we wanted to. These are virtual. They're not going to be real folders. So you just name your folder. So we'll just call it folder name just as a demo, and we hit save. And now it's going to go through the publishing process. So the very first thing it does is it creates the item associated with it. And you can see that. It's nice and quick. The item, again, it's just metadata. It just needs the creation time, what it is, and you can see it's already established this as a feature layer hosted. But then it needs to communicate with ArcGIS Enterprise, ArcGIS Server as part of ArcGIS Enterprise, and the data store. So it has to talk to ArcGIS Server, say, here's some data, and then ArcGIS Server will publish it to the data store and make a map service associated with it. So once it's all completed, it then has the ability of having a URL associated with it. And you can see it has just that one layer, in this case that shapefile, Canada. And let's just go back to here. And you notice there's no view in this. So that's because this is a feature server. So when you publish something through ArcGIS Enterprise's portal, it becomes a feature server. I do have another video on how to publish map services directly to ArcGIS Server. That is a capability. But when you're dealing with portal, it's always going to be a feature server for this type of data. So this got created. So let's go take a look at the item. So we know how to get the item information. It's right here. This is the item ID associated with this. So we'll copy that. We're going to open up the local computer to where ArcGIS portal is installed. And we can just pull a hack here. We know that the item is going to be this name with that directory, so we'll just go to that directory, and here it is. So this is the directory, and you can see this has a lot more information about the data that was published. In particular, it has publishing parameters as well as the item information. It does have a thumbnail in here, which if it had a thumbnail, this is where it would be. So that's where that is coming from. And it does have some metadata associated with the item itself. And you can see creation date, creation time, the format, etc. It does have a geographic extent around it just so I can zoom in very quickly to it as well. So editing this information is not advisable. Always use the portal. This is really just showing you where things are. And if you ever had a disaster, you could always go grab some of the data back. But you notice there's no actual shapefiles in here. So that item page / this, there's no data. So when I published that map service, when I published the shapefile and I told it to upload the shapefile and then publish it, there is no shapefile here. However, if we go back to the items, you'll notice that there is actually a second item, which is the shapefile itself. So this, like the PDF, will contain that file. So again, we'll go get its item information. We'll get its item number. We'll go back to here. We can change the directory to be that next item, and now you can see that Canada.zip. So what ArcGIS Enterprise, the portal component, did is it first uploaded the shapefile as a new item. Then it took that item, used ArcGIS Server to copy it and publish it as not only a feature service, but put it into the data store. And that encompasses the entire environment now. So we've uploaded that data. Now, this data is linked to the item, and the item has security on it. So let's go try something out here. If I go back to the content, you'll notice that these are only shared to me as a local user. Nobody else can access to it. If I log out and I go sign in, this time as my viewer, the viewer has nothing in content. It's empty. And if they go to the organization, they'll see anything that is public, but not that other user's data. So let's sign out and go back in as the creator user. And you can see I did put these in a folder. I call them folder name. So if you view all content, demo creator, it only contains this, and then folder name only contains those two items. I should mention that technically speaking, it's calling it a folder, but in reality, the item information you can see, if I sort by date, it's these two items. There is no folder name in here. It doesn't actually create a folder on the overall environment. That folder name is actually just a little bit of information that is stored in the JSON that is actually written to the ArcGIS Enterprise environment itself. So this data is here, and we could share this. So if we share just this, view item details, and we'll share with the organization, and now we log in as that other user, it'll be able to actually see that item. So content, my organization, and there's the Canada video demo. I can go to video, I can go view item details on it, and I get a lot less settings in here. It removes all of the settings associated with trying to publish and manage the data, but it does have the ability to open it in a map viewer. It also does have the REST endpoint, and I can go view the data that's in it, but down here it will have less settings available to me. So this one is the feature server. Depending on how you log into it, it will have different rights. The system's going to be a little confused because I'm logged in twice. But I can actually look at the data associated with this inside of here, and I can even add it to a map. And the viewer itself can actually, as you can see, not save it. Again, the viewer really is just a viewer. It doesn't have any other options. So the viewer users are pretty basic. They can use some applications and do some things with them. Hopefully that gives you a full tour of the ArcGIS Enterprise environment. Thank you for spending the time with me. Have a great rest of your day.